Hey everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. We're here today to talk about the critique process and how you can get the most out of the fastest 3 minutes in indoor percussion. We've got a guest with me here today. Jim Dwyer is here with me. Jim, how you doing?
Great, Caleb. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. Jim, I thought you'd be a great guy to talk to for this. You've obviously got a lot of experience on both sides of the table in the activity through the years with lots of different critique experiences. And personally, I can say during my instructional days, always some of the most productive and most enlightening critiques that I had were the two of us sitting across the table talking about shows. So I thought it'd be great for you and I to kind of dig into the process a little bit tonight and give people some insight into how they can perhaps do a better job of that. I think, first of all, I'd like to start with the impetus for this conversation. Since in my role as percussion education coordinator, since I've been in that role, I've had the opportunity to observe a lot of critique processes, more than I ever did when I was teaching, and kind of be a fly on the wall. Quite frankly, I've been appalled at times at how unproductive those conversations have been. And I think everybody has always meant well, but I've observed really a lot of things that I think groups have done to themselves to not set them up for success very much. And I'm hoping today you and I can kind of talk about maybe some of the do's and don'ts and steer some people in a more productive direction, because I really do feel like this opportunity is one of the best things that we have going for us in this activity. It's truly a very valuable educational opportunity, and I want to see people really seize that as much as possible. So thank you for agreeing to come help us out with that today. Let's start off first with just talking about, for a second, what critique is for. What is it? Perhaps I'm a new instructor. I don't have a lot of experience in this. I've been teaching marching band for a while where I don't get the critique experience. What is this for in the WGI activity?
Caleb, critique, and critique is really disappearing in this activity across the board. Most of forms of pageantry are limiting or doing away with critique quite a bit. And so it is the fastest 3 minutes in indoor percussion, and I think it's one of the best opportunities. Now, it's an instructor-led opportunity, and those are key words. It's really the instructor's lead that's going to take them through that process of critique. And what it really is for an instructional staff to get clarification on points that may have been made on the audio recording. We call them the tapes, of course. The tapes that were made during their show that perhaps where one of the judges wasn't clear and concise in what they were saying, or perhaps they want some clarification on that point, or perhaps we responded either favorably or non-favorably to something that they were doing and they want to find out why that is. So ultimately, it's an opportunity for the instructional staff to get their questions answered, and mostly those questions should be centered around the tape commentary that the judge made during that afternoon's performance.
Excellent. So now that we kind of know what it's for and what we can do with that time, can you give me a little bit of insight into some of the things that people can do ahead of time to prepare for that? I get the feeling that a lot of people kind of, they show up at the critique, they walk in, they sit down, and they just start going, and there's not a whole lot of thought ahead of time about how to prepare for that and really make the most of that time. So can you give me some suggestions on what people can do?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer is in the question, the word prepare. And so, the Boy Scout motto, be prepared, applies here through and through. And I think the single most important thing that any staff can do to be prepared is to listen to the tapes. Nothing is less rewarding for the judge than when a group comes in and says, hey, we didn't have time to listen to the tapes. What'd you think? Well, the truth is we just spent whatever amount of time you were on the floor telling you exactly what we thought in real time. While you were doing it, we told you our reaction. So when an instructor comes in and says, hey, we didn't get time to listen to the tapes, well, you need to make that a priority. You really do. And, of course, while you're listening to them, you should be taking copious notes. You should be taking thorough notes on what it is that we're saying. And maybe make a plus and a minus, the favorable and non-favorable columns, so that you could say this applied to composition, the what and the how. It applied to whether it was a positive or negative comment, and then circle the ones. You're not going to probably get everything. I mean, it's 3 minutes. And if you have 15 points to cover, we're probably not going to get to those in any detail. So rather than focusing on the micro, I think you want to put all the questions down and then prioritize them and put them in an outline form and say, well, these are my top 3, 4, 5 points, if you will, in the macro that I want to get clarified with Jim Dwyer or Chris Heston or Scott Johnson, whatever the case may be. And I want to make sure when I get those clarified, if I have time left over, then we can go through these other points that may be a secondary or tertiary point. But make sure you keep the main thing, listen to the tapes, and really, if it's possible, and I understand that it's not always possible, but if possible, let's have in critique, when you're sitting with me at the visual table, let's try to have someone on the visual staff, if not the visual designer, available. I know it's not always possible, but let's get as close to that as possible as we can, so that the PA guy is talking to the drum tech guy, and the GE guy is talking to the program coordinator and things like that, so that we have a better language. We speak the same jargon. So listen to the tapes, take really good notes, prioritize those notes. And then here's a big one. I often see groups make a mistake with this, Caleb. They come in, there's 4 or 5 or 6, and sometimes many more people on staff, but no lead person, no point person. I think you have to designate someone the point person, or else what ends up happening is the cymbal tech, well, he or she has a question specific to just the cymbals, and then the snare guy, then the tenor guy, then the bass guy, then the front ensemble guy, and the next thing you know, no one's talking about the big picture, which is, what's the uniform? Does it work with the tarp? Does the entrance work? Is the show staging work? We're talking about whether a cymbal visual or a stick twirl from the tenors is appropriate at that time. Those things can be hashed out later. Let's get a point person, and let's prioritize your points to get them clarified in the order of hopefully macro down to micro.
We have a great tool available on the website now. We've developed kind of a critique worksheet that we think will be really beneficial for any instructors out there, regardless of your level of experience, to really help you get focused on what were the strengths from the recording, where are the areas the judge maybe didn't respond as strong as you'd like, what are maybe 3 different topics you'd like to talk about in critique, because remember, it's only 3 minutes long, so if you go in with a list of 15 different things you'd like to discuss, there's no way you're going to get through it. So it'll really kind of help funnel that conversation and get you prepared to walk in, and also a little space to take some notes during that. Speaking of coming in with some handwritten materials, for you, just personally as an adjudicator, does it change the nature of that conversation when a staff comes in with some handwritten notes ahead of time as opposed to coming in without those notes?
I'm not sure if it changes it or not. I think that's a subjective point, but I will say this. For me personally, when I see someone come in, I'm a big believer that the weakest ink is better than the strongest memory. And we also have to keep in mind, when I taught, when you taught, that we're passing that legacy on to our assistants, who one day will be directors of percussion with their ensemble. So you and I may have great recall. I've sat across critique from some people who are incredibly well organized and mentally are able to take those notes and go through them. But you'd be better off writing them down to show that process, because that's a very duplicatable process that you can give to other people. So I think that's important. I would do that. When I see someone come in with a list of notes, perhaps I feel like it's going to be more productive, not for me necessarily, but for them. I feel like they're going to get, now that isn't always the case, because sometimes the notes aren't organized and not prioritized, and they didn't go through them efficiently. But at least it's a starting point. It's way better than when someone comes in and spends half the time just with preliminary pleasantries asking me about how's the weather in Philadelphia, or did you enjoy the boat this summer. Those are all great things, and this is a very social activity, and we don't run away from you. We'll hang out at the restaurant down the street or in the parking lot and talk about that. Let's use those 3 minutes. We don't have to, just a simple hello, a smile is always a warm welcome, but let's get right down to brass tacks. Let's get your questions answered. Let's clarify the points that will make your ensemble. That's your responsibility to your students, is to give them the opportunity to perform at a higher level every single week consecutively leading up to either your circuit championships or, if you're coming to Dayton, the world championships.
That's a perfect segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, now that we've done the preparation and we're in there and we're in the room and they say, okay, your time's starting, how do we use that time? What should we be doing during critique? I think your point about get down to business very quickly and get that conversation going is incredibly important. I love the idea about the lead person kind of taking control of that conversation and run with it. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add about what to do during those 3 minutes to be as productive as possible?
Well, take notes. Again, if you have a question that you've written down on a sheet of paper, leave room below it for the answer. And then write your answer down so that when you go to rehearsal 2, 3, 4 days later, whatever your rehearsal schedule allows, you can pull out your notes and say, well, I asked Jim Dwyer, I asked Chris Heston, I asked Scott Johnson about this. I asked Brian Mason and he said this. Julie Dalvia said this. Well, then try it. See if that works for you. Maybe sit down with your staff before the next rehearsal, maybe on the way home on the bus, and say, hey, this was the suggestion from the judging community. How do we feel about that? Because ultimately it's your product. We're there to tell you our thoughts, our opinions on it, but it's your product. You get to say, I don't agree with that. I'm going to do it this way, and that's fine. we don't have a problem with that, but I would at least try it. So I would have room for my answers, or whoever's answers, under the questions that you're going to ask. Again, I'm going to repeat it. The weakest thing, better than the strongest memory. Don't think you're going to remember, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave critique, or you're going to sit at my table first, then you're going to go to the PA table, then the GE table, then you're going to go out in the hallway, you're going to say hi to 5 or 6 friends, then there's going to be a crisis, one of the buses is going to break down on the way home, the truck isn't going to get there on time, the kids broke a base, and the next thing you know, you forgot maybe the most salient point that we talked about in critique. So commit it to ink, put it on paper, so that you have a document to run your next rehearsal from.
And I think one of the other things to do there, and you'll probably agree with me on this, Jim, is that it's very important during critique, to keep the conversation moving, to not let yourself go down a rabbit hole that may not be that productive. Remember, instructors, this is your 3 minutes. So if you find that you start down the road in a dialogue with an adjudicator and you go, this is not productive, this is not germane to where my ensemble is right now, change it up. Don't feel hesitant in the middle of a conversation to go, you know what, let's switch gears and talk about something else. It's your 3 minutes. It takes a lot of practice to get there. It really is an art form, but it's something you got to invest in yourself.
Okay, let me jump in real quick and say this. Don't worry about offending us by truncating a conversation. We're there for you. If you want to come in and just arm wrestle, we could do that, I guess. It's whatever you want it to be. But if we start and you say, you know what, never mind that. We're not offended by that. We're really not. I want it to be the most productive use of your time. So you've got to make that happen. You've got to direct that. It's instructor-led.
Excellent. And then I think the other thing to point out would be body language really communicates a lot. Would you mind talking about that just a little bit, telling me some of the things you've seen?
You're in my wheelhouse because, of course, I do a lot of motivational speaking for my company as my career. And one of the things we often talk about is, so much of communication. The experts say over 70% of communication is nonverbal. It's your body language. So if you walk in and you're clearly upset, if your arms are folded, if you're distended from the group, if you are huffing and puffing and tisking and slamming your hand down on a desk or whatever the case may be, it's not going to be very productive. You get far more with sugar than you do with vinegar, right? So now I'm not saying you have to come in and be all. You may disagree with everything I said, and you have a right to be frustrated. We're not going to tell you not to be, but I think in order for it to be productive, you've got to learn to disagree without being disagreeable. You've got to be able to come into the room and say, I don't necessarily agree with that. I didn't think that's what it was going to be. Often, Caleb, groups will come into critique and they'll say to me, let me tell you what our show's about. And if I can, I'll stop them and I'll say, no, wait. Let me tell you what I think it's about. And then you tell me how close we are. Literally, this is factual. 10 years ago, a group came in. The show was very confusing to me. They said, let me tell you what it's about. I said, I think it's about someone getting robbed at an ATM. They said it's about cloning. We could not have been, much further apart. And so they had a lot of work to do, and I had a lot of work to do. The judging community had a lot of work to do. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to, as you troubleshoot something, you start wide and you narrow it down. So that's what we're looking to do. So I would say to you that, again, it's your time. Let's get it, let's get it figured out. But make sure that you're presenting. I often see groups come in and they'll say to me, I couldn't have been any more clear in our presentation. Well, you wrote it. So you're seeing what you wrote, maybe not what's being performed. And keep in mind, for a lot of instructors, you're dealing with high school kids. And you know how that goes. I taught a high school for many, many years, and the truth is, if Tommy breaks up with Gina on the bus ride over, it's going to probably be a bad show. All right? And so tons of things can happen. I've seen groups, prelims to finals, be 2 completely different ensembles in terms of maturity and confidence and presence on the floor. One of the things I love about our activity is, at least in my experience, in my tenure here, that those groups are rewarded accordingly. I truly feel like any given ensemble has the opportunity to succeed if they bring it that particular show.
Excellent. Jim, thank you very much for talking with me today. I really appreciate you taking out the time to do this. Jim and I are going to talk one more time in part 2 about critique, so please make sure that you look for that in upcoming time, and definitely have some more thoughts. We'll get into some of the details about what not to do and what to do and how to best use that time. Jim, thank you very much.
Thanks, Taylor. I appreciate it.
Bye.